time and to start right on where you left off, and you just wasted a little time and got a little frustrated, but you end up finally getting the painting done. And it's kind of a awesome thing when you paint a picture that of something that happened 200 years ago. You try to do it with the best research you can and try to get it right. It's your version of it, and you get these people that are really into this will come, and none of them ever agree with you, so you got to get used to that right away when you're standing around. But anyhow, I think it does something that sticks with people, and there was two historical artists that I like to quote from. One was Benjamin West. He was from here in America, and he went over to England and started painting, and he realized that historical paintings were so much better than just portraits. They really told a story and everything, and he ended up being a painter for the king. And he told one of his students once, he said, it was worthy of an artist to paint something about God or religion or your country or your family or some hero or heroic deed that was done in the past. And this would in turn inspire the younger generation coming up when they saw these things. And that always kind of stuck with me, and I think about the TV the kids watch now, and I just wonder if that holds true, what's going to happen to a lot of the kids nowadays, from what they watch. But anyhow, that was his quote. And then there was another one by the name of J.L.G. Ferris. He painted a lot of paintings of George Washington. You can probably remember him from the history books. And I got to see him, by the way. The guy that has the collection now invited me up to Bay Village in Cleveland and showed me a lot of those paintings, and I was standing there with my mouth open looking at them after seeing them in history books all those years. And anyhow, the paintings that Ferris did, he said that if you can't do historic or heroic things yourself, and if you're an artist, the best thing you can do is paint the scene for other people to get inspired from it. So those two things always stuck with me about historical paintings, and that's why I keep doing them. I want people to remember the Indians, and I paint a lot of them that's kind of on the Indian side, because we only heard about what the white people talked about the Indians in most of the histories, and try to get their viewpoint of it and show some of the terrible things that happened to them and the unjust things that's happened to the Indian people. So anyhow, that's kind of the story on what I do and everything. And if we can get Jennifer to maybe clip on a few of these pictures here, and I'll kind of explain what they are. This is the second Greenville Treaty picture. There was 2 treaties signed in Greenville, and this was the second one. Yeah, that'd be fine. Now, this one here you may recognize if you study any history, but this is Little Turtle when he went to Philadelphia to see the president. And the guy's seated there. That's being painted. And William Wells is the interpreter. He was a captive of the Miami and Little Turtle's son, and he later escaped and became a spy and for General Wayne. The fellow that's doing the painting is the Gilbert Stuart that painted the unfinished Washington. He was quite famous in Washington. Had him paint Little Turtle. That's how much they thought of Little Turtle while he was there. And Volney was a French philosopher. He wrote a lot about Little Turtle, and I just thought it would be a neat scene to show this, what they call savages in those days, to which he was sitting there, and it's called Among Gentlemen. He was able to keep up with the wit and everything that all the people they call gentlemen in Philadelphia at that time. Okay, the next one then, Jennifer. Yeah, this is Blue Jacket at Fort Miamis. The British built a fort up close on Toledo there, and they were kind of egging the Indians on to fight the Americans. And when Anthony Wayne hit them at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, they expected the British to help them, and they didn't have any intentions of helping them. In fact, when they retreated, they went to the fort expecting to get in, and you can see the gates are closed. And after that, the Indians kind of gave up fighting for their country here. And I thought that was an important thing that no one ever painted. And kind of a funny thing happened, though. They did some excavations and everything, and Larry Nelson at Fort Meigs told me one day, he says, you know, they didn't have any gates at Fort Meigs. He said they had like tunnels underground or something. And I says, well, you're either going to have to bulldoze them shut, or I'm going to change my painting then. So I never changed my painting, but I don't think he's bulldozed his gate shut either. But it probably wasn't the gate on top of the ground if it was a tunnel that went down under the ground. But all that ground had probably caved in at one time, and I don't know if they can tell if that was a tunnel or if that's where it really was or not. But all the history books I read, it was gates that they closed on them. Okay, that's enough about that one. And this is the burning of Crawford. This was a sad thing that happened. Colonel Crawford was a friend of George Washington. He took an expedition up towards Upper Sandusky, and the Indians outwitted him, and they surrounded him, and they had to retreat. And Crawford had a number of his relatives with him, and they all got scattered. It was dark when they tried to break out of the circle that they were penned in, and he couldn't find his relatives, and he stuck around and got a late start, and they captured him and Dr. Knight, the fellow that's sitting on his knees ready to be burned. And this happened right after they killed all the Indians over at Ganeta Hutton, and the Indians were really mad about that, so they took it out on Crawford, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. They were going to burn him. So they stripped them of their clothing, which I have laying there on the ground, and they painted them black, usually their face at least, and they were building the fire, and this fellow on the white horse was Simon Girty. He tried to save him, but he wasn't able to. They said they would burn him too if he got his nose in it any farther. And this Indian chief that's standing right in front of the horse knew Crawford at the time. They were friendly at one time, but he couldn't even save him. He said, you put yourself in a bad fix, and this happened up at Upper Sandusky. And so they did burn him, but Dr. Knight finally escaped when they were taking him to another town, and he told the whole story what happened. So that's about it on that one. And this one here is just a canoe painting. I painted, there's a lady called Frances Hopkins that paints canoe paintings from Canada, and I love those canoes. And they hauled the freights, freight for the furs and the goods that they traded for the furs and these things, and this is a Hudson Bay thing. And these voyagers were really tough guys that canoed those for miles and miles, and all they do would stop and take a smoke break. They had little pipes they smoked. Two people in the center were people that owned these fur companies and stuff, and they would ride while the other guys moved them along, and they would run some of these rapid waters. Those canoes were made out of birch bark and pretty frail, so these guys were really good, and a lot of times they did get smashed up and lost all their cargo and everything. But it kind of fit in with the Indian stories. You're better at this than I am home on the computer. This is a guy by the name of Captain Johnny, and I knew a descendant of his, and I used him as my model, and I decided to paint a portrait for the fella. He was a Shawnee that actually was quite a warrior here, and you can see he's got the King George medal on him and everything. I used the descendant as my model, and he told me what kind of clothing he wore and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of people get uptight about some of the things. They had rings in their nose and everything. It's like the kids we have nowadays, but that's the way they dress, you know. So that was Captain Johnny. If you ever read about him in the history books, that's what I think he looks like. This one here is about the Moravians over close to New Philadelphia, Ohio. The Captain Pipe on the white horse there came down. He was a Delaware chief, half a king, and they captured Heckewelder and Zeisberger were teaching these people to become Christians, and they made them all leave that area. They had their crops there and everything, and took them up to Upper Sandusky because they thought they were spying for the Americans, and it was really a rough trip that they went through. They came back to get their corn later on. They were starving to death, and that's when they were all massacred. The big massacre you hear where they got the big statue there at at Grenada Hutton where they were massacred. I think there was